name is Anna Miller, and I'm in my second term as the Education Coordinator at Riverlink through AmeriCorps Project Conserve.
And I'm Sarah, and I'm serving as Riverlink's Watershed Resource Coordinator.
As the Education Coordinator, I teach K-12 students throughout the French Broad River watershed about stream ecology. Part of that is teaching about the plant life that we find in our watersheds. A lot of that plant life can be invasive species though, so I'm happy today to help you learn about the invasive species we find in Western North Carolina and how you can help handle them.
And part of what we do through our Watershed Resource Program is remove invasive species throughout the French Broad River watershed. So today we'll learn more about how we do that and why it's so important.
What are invasive species? According to the National Invasive Species Information Center in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, an invasive species is an alien species whose introduction does or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. Invasive species can be plants, animals, or other organisms like microbes. It is a non-native species to the ecosystem under consideration, which means that the species can be native to that country, but just not normally found in those ecosystems. The introduction also causes or is likely to cause damage to that ecosystem in order for it to be considered an invasive species. We'll now discuss some common characteristics of invasive plants. They often have fast growth and reproduction, quickly spreading roots and vines or stems, and producing high volumes of seeds. They have high dispersal abilities of those seeds as well, typically easily carried by wind, water, and animals such as birds. Invasive plants are often habitat generalist, meaning they can easily adapt to a variety of conditions and grow in many ecosystems. And because they are not native to these areas, they also don't have any natural predators like insects to help control their growth. These common characteristics lead to why they become problems in their non-native ecosystems. The prolific growth of invasive plants can lead to the extinction of native plants and animals. That can be done through the invasive outcompeting native plants for space, nutrients, and sunlight, or physical damage to other plants by the weight of growing vines. Animals will also lose important habitat and food sources. While many animals, like birds, can eat the seeds or fruits of the invasive plants, they aren't as nutritious for them as the seeds and fruits of native species would be, so they can become full without getting the nutrition that they really need. This reduction in native species further reduces biodiversity and can permanently alter habitats or ecosystems, leading to whole hillsides of only kudzu, like you see in this picture.
Would you look at all that kudzu? Now we're going to go over a few common invasive species found throughout the French Broad River watershed. I remove these invasive species on a regular basis, and they're causing huge problems to our ecosystems here in Asheville. Japanese knotweed is a common non-native invasive plant along streams and rivers, and one of my arch nemeses. New growth is often red, and the stalk resembles asparagus. Mature plants have green spade-shaped leaves, white flowers, and a hollow stem. It was introduced to the United States in the 1800s as an ornamental plant. It spreads through rhizomes or underground stems, which makes it very difficult to eradicate. It can also spread when parts of the plant break off and grow into a new plant, which increases the rate at which it invades new areas, specifically because it grows along streams very frequently, and so if a piece breaks off, a new patch will grow downstream of that. It is problematic because it grows quickly and outcompetes native species. The stalk of Japanese knotweed is technically edible, and the entire plant is used in Chinese medicine for conditions such as cough, inflammation, sore throat, and gingivitis. Porcelain berry is another common non-native invasive in Western North Carolina, which grows in sunny areas such as forest edges, riparian areas, fragmented forests, and residential areas. The leaves of porcelain berry resemble grape leaves and can be heart-shaped or lobed, with 3 to 5 divisions. Porcelain berry is easily identified by the berries, which range from light green when immature to white, purple, blue, and turquoise when mature. The brightly colored berries are the reason it was considered a choice ornamental plant. It was introduced in the 1870s and has caused massive ecological damage since then. It is harmful to native plants because it grows in thick blankets, covering trees and shrubs and preventing them from being able to photosynthesize. They also make the plant more susceptible to damage from storms because they form heavy mats that increase the chance for limbs to collapse. Porcelain berry can also be harmful to migratory birds because the berries are not nutrient dense and don't contain as much fat as native berries. Therefore, migratory birds don't get the food they need, and they have to stop more frequently, which can prevent them from reaching their destination in time and can lead to starvation. Birds and other wildlife actually spread the seeds of porcelain berry, though, increasing the problem that it's causing for them. Porcelain berry also spreads through vegetative growth and can re-sprout from the roots when vegetation is cut back, if the roots are not removed.
Kudzu is a well-known invasive plant found along roadsides, ditches, abandoned fields, open hillsides, and forest edges. This plant thrives in areas with mild winters and hot summers, so the southeastern United States makes a great breeding ground. It was introduced to the United States from Japan during the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exposition, where it was talked up as a great ornamental plant for its blooms and sturdy vines. The Soil Conservation Service took an interest in kudzu as a bank stabilization tool and planted it widely throughout the South from the 1930s to the 1950s. This led to its nickname as the vine that ate the South, as it quickly grew out of control, spreading through underground stems and vines that can form roots as well. The vine is semi-woody, with alternating leaves made of 3 oval-shaped or lobed leaflets. After 3 years, it produces purple or red flowers and clusters of hairy brown seed pods. Because it can grow a foot within a day, kudzu can overtake anything in its path and outcompetes other plants by shading them from sunlight. The climbing vines can strangle trees during growth, and their weight can make weakened trees fall or lose branches. All of this can lead to a loss of biodiversity in other plants and animals, which lose habitat and food sources. This vine is particularly difficult to eradicate because of the underground root crowns, which store significant amounts of sugars and water, which means it even resists fire damage that kills other plants, while kudzu can grow new vines easily.
Tree of Heaven is an invasive tree that can grow almost anywhere, which is one of the reasons it's so problematic. It was first brought to the U.S. from China in the late 1700s as an ornamental tree. Urban landscapers loved it for its ability to grow quickly and provide shade, and for its resistance to pests and disease. However, these qualities that were once greatly appreciated are now seen as some of the tree's worst traits. In addition to its quick growth, Tree of Heaven spreads prolifically, both through sending up root suckers and through seeds. One female tree can produce up to 300,000 seeds annually, and trees can start producing seeds in as little as 2 years. With its fast growth and spread, it easily outcompetes native species. It also produces allelopathic chemicals in its root that kill off other species, giving it yet another advantage over native plants. It can be identified by its compound leaves with smooth leaflets that have a bump at the base. This tree is also easily identified by smell when the leaves are crushed.
Smells like burnt peanut butter.
The flowers are also known to produce a strong offensive odor, giving it other common names such as stink tree and stink sumac.
Princess tree, originally native to Eastern Asia, can be found in North Carolina, mostly in the foothill and mountain regions, on roadsides, forests, stream banks, and steep rocky slopes. It is a moderately cold-hardy plant, which tolerates high soil acidity, drought, and low soil fertility, so it can survive on harsh exposed sites. It was imported to Europe in the 1830s by the Dutch East India Company, and then brought to North America a few years later. It was planted for horticultural purposes all along the East Coast and across to Texas. This plant is a small to medium deciduous tree with large heart-shaped leaves arranged oppositely along the branches. The leaves are a fuzzy, velvety texture on the underside, and the bark is a grayish-brown color with small fissures. Princess tree flowers in April and May with upright, pyramidal clusters of lavender, tubular, bell-shaped flowers. The fruits are oval, pecan-like capsules that start out sticky and green, before turning brown and dry, staying on the tree throughout the winter. The seeds are easily transported by wind and water, with one tree capable of producing 20 million seeds. It can also spread by producing root sprouts. Because of its ability to grow in harsh conditions like rocky slopes, it competes with rare plants in those habitats and displaces native species. Often confused with the southern catalpa, but the catalpa's long, slender beans and whorled leaves mark their differences.
Japanese stiltgrass is an invasive grass commonly found in shady, moist areas such as woodlands and along stream banks, and commonly found in landscaped areas in turfgrass. It is a unique-looking grass that resembles a tiny stalk of bamboo. It has alternate leaves that are pale green that have a shiny silver streak through the middle, slightly off-center. It was first introduced to the U.S. in 1919 and was introduced as packing material from shipments from Asia. It is an annual plant, so if it is removed before setting seeds, it can be eradicated. However, each plant can produce 100 to 1,000 seeds, and seeds can last in the soil bank for 5 years, which can make it very difficult to control after setting seeds. Grazers also tend to avoid eating it, which also increases the rate at which it spreads. Once established, it crowds out native species, which is why it is problematic.
Oriental Bittersweet was introduced to the United States in the 1860s for ornamental use, and is now found from Maine to North Carolina and west to Illinois. This species of bittersweet is originally native to Japan, Korea, and northern China. In the mountains of North Carolina, it is often found on old home sites, forest edges, hedgerows, fields, disturbed woodlands, and roadsides. It most often grows in open, sunny sites, but is shade-tolerant, so can invade forested areas. This deciduous woody perennial vine has separate female, or fruiting, and male, non-fruiting, plants. The leaves are alternate, glossy, and rounded with finely toothed edges. Between May and June, clusters of small, white-green flowers grow from the leaf axils. Fruits will ripen and turn from green to yellow in August to September, then in winter, the fruits will split open to reveal a red-orange interior. The stems have lenticels, which are many raised white quirky dots, and the roots are a distinctive orange color. Bittersweet is still widely used for floral arrangements, wreaths, and landscaping, which aids its spread. The seeds are also consumed by a wide variety of birds, which give them a long range of dispersal. Like many of the other invasive vines, it can also expand by the growth of underground stems called rhizomes, and send new growth shoots up from the roots, known as root suckering. Also, like other vines, it will completely cover another plant, shading it out, which prevents photosynthesis and adding excessive weight, which can cause uprooting or broken branches. The twining nature of this vine can also girdle or strangle trees. Oriental bittersweet can be easily confused with the native American bittersweet, which is becoming increasingly rarer. The American bittersweet generally produces fruits that are a brighter red and found only at the end of stems in clusters of 3 to 7, as opposed to Oriental bittersweet, which has larger clusters of fruit at the leaf axils all along the stem. The two species have been known to hybridize as well, which further threatens the native bittersweet. Japanese honeysuckle is commonly found on forest margins, fields, and in forest, spreading vertically and horizontally. It was introduced to the United States in the early to mid-1800s as an ornamental plant from Eastern Asia. In North Carolina, this perennial twining and trailing vine is considered semi-evergreen to evergreen. The slender young stems mature into hollow older stems up to 2 inches in diameter, with a brownish bark that peels in long strips. Oblong, oval-shaped leaves are arranged in opposite pairs along the stem. Mature leaves will have smooth edges, while younger leaves are often lobed. White and pale yellow trumpet-shaped flowers bloom from April to August as pairs between the leaves, and small spherical black fruits grow in autumn. Honeysuckle spreads through prolific vine growth as long above-ground runners, which can develop roots at the nodes, which help it form dense mats. Underground, it spreads by rhizome growth, and the fruits can be dispersed long distances by birds. It is often promoted for landscape use because of its rapid growth and fragrant flowers, and as winter forage for deer. Its prolific growth can cause it to girdle trees and shrubs and shade them out under its dense mats of vines. There are 2 native species of honeysuckle, which are distinguished from the Japanese species by its leaves near the tips of the vine and by the fruits. In Japanese honeysuckle, the leaves are distinctly separate, while in the native species, the leaves are fused to form a single leaf which the stem grows through.
Multiflora Rose is an invasive species commonly found along streams and forest edges. It was introduced to the U.S. in the 1700s for use as a living fence and for erosion control. Multiflora Rose is distinguished from other roses by the fringe where the compound leaves meet the stem, and by the clusters of 5-leaved white flowers, which bloom in May. The compound leaves usually contain 5 to 7 leaflets. The stems have nasty thorns. A single bush can reach heights of 10 feet and can grow 10 feet wide. Multiflora Rose is harmful to the ecosystem because it grows in dense thickets that prevent native plants from growing and form impenetrable clusters that wildlife cannot migrate through. Seeds can last in the soil bank for up to 20 years, and stems can spread out and take root from the tip, increasing the rate at which it spreads. Now that we've talked about a few common non-native invasive species, you can start to understand why they're problematic. Not only are they harmful to plant life, but they're also harmful to pollinators and other wildlife. Left unchecked, invasive species will grow out of control. But there's hope. There are things that you can do to control their population and eradicate them. The methods of control will depend greatly on what kind of species you're trying to get rid of. So we're going to talk about 2 species today, Kudzu and Japanese knotweed, because both of them have pretty extensive removal processes. Given the quick-growing nature of kudzu, removing it can seem like a daunting task. Therefore, it is best to be strategic in order to use your time efficiently. There are 2 methods of kudzu removal that we recommend. The first is surgical crown removal. If you are dealing with a dense thicket of kudzu, this will likely need to be done in 2 stages. First, cut back the kudzu and remove as many vines as you can. Be sure to bag them up when you're done, or they can resprout. For kudzu vines that are growing up large trees, you can just cut the vines so they're no longer attached to the roots, rather than trying to pull them down from the trees, which could cause the limbs to collapse. You shouldn't expect to remove all the kudzu in one sitting, but rather to clear as much of it as you can out for visibility. Stage 2 involves removing the root crowns. Kudzu stores massive amounts of energy in large root crowns, which is why cutting it back alone isn't effective. Not even fire will kill it if the root crowns are intact. These root crowns need to be dug up and disposed of, which will cut off the kudzu's sugar supply and prevent it from growing back. Another recommended method of removal involves cutting the vines back to the roots and applying a small amount of pesticide to the roots where you've cut. Since the pesticide will be applied directly to the roots, you should use a more concentrated chemical. We recommend using a 50% solution of glyphosate or tricloper. You can put the chemical into an old shoe polish bottle and use that to paint the stumps. This method does not require you to dig up the massive roots, but you will need to be sure to cut and paint as many vines as possible in order to effectively remove the kudzu. If you do find a root crown, you should cut a deep gash into it and apply pesticide there as well. Japanese knotweed has a reputation for being one of the most difficult invasives to control. If you see a new patch of knotweed pop up on your property, you can effectively remove it by pulling it out, making sure to remove the roots. However, if you have an older stand, hand pulling will not be effective because of the underground rhizomes. We recommend taking a 2-step approach to removing knotweed. First, cut it back to a stump, leaving a few inches of growth. This step is best done early in June. After you've cut back the knotweed, wait for 6 weeks. This will allow the knotweed to grow back, forcing it to use energy reserves from its roots. After the 6-week period, chemically treat the knotweed. Use a foliar spray of 3 to 4% glyphosate plus 0.5% non-ionic surfactant and dye. The non-ionic surfactant helps the chemicals to stick to the leaves so that it doesn't just wash off into the soil, and the dye helps you to see which plants have already been treated so that you don't overspray and remember which ones to avoid. Make sure to use the aquatic safe glyphosate if you are spraying near water. This foliar spray should kill the knotweed back and prevent regrowth, since the plant used its sugar reserves to grow back after the initial cuts. Now, I know right now some of you might be thinking, I don't like pesticides. I eat organic and I try to stay away from chemicals, so why would I want to spray chemicals on plants that are in my yard? That doesn't make sense to me. And honestly, I don't like pesticides either. But when it comes to exotic invasive species, sometimes there just isn't another way to effectively control them. So with pesticide use, it's really about responsible pesticide use. Being sure to use as little as possible to effectively get the job done, and making sure not to just widely spray it where it's going to get into streams or into the soil or on native plants. And also, it's really important not to spray the flowers if you can avoid it, but only to spray the leaves, because the flowers are what the pollinators are going to be visiting, whereas the leaves, they're not really going to be landing on as much, or at least they're not going to be trying to drink out of the leaves as much. So when it comes to whether or not to use pesticides, when it's your lawn, it's your choice. But on these public lands, we do occasionally use chemicals to control invasive species because we just don't have the manpower to do it otherwise. And we just couldn't effectively get rid of these populations without an occasional pesticide. So we use them now and again, and it helps. So now that you've taken the time to learn about some invasive species of Western North Carolina with us today, we're asking for your help. If you have any invasive species on your property, please do your best to remove them so that they don't spread elsewhere. This is critically important if you have a stream or a river on your property or on the edge of your property, or if you are close to public land, such as a park or something. Because just because it's only in one location now does not mean it's only going to stay in that location. So if you can help by removing invasives from your private property, it will help us to protect public lands from invasive species as well. Thank you. After you remove invasive species, whatever plant matter you have left should go into a trash bag. If you leave that plant matter on the ground, whether or not it has seeds or whether it's just vegetative growth, it can often grow into a whole new plant. A lot of these invasives are really good at resprouting just from a stem or something, so it can reroot, and then you haven't effectively removed the problem, you've just moved it. So bag it up when you're done. If you run out of bags or something, you can leave the invasives out to dry somewhere, but make sure that it's somewhere where they're not going to blow away and where they're not going to be able to reroot. Occasionally I will leave a few on my front porch because I know that they're not going to blow anywhere and it's made out of cement. But I really prefer to bag it up. That's the best method.